good evening, or perhaps good morning, depending on where you find yourself in this vast tapestry of time. Tonight, we invite you to journey with us, not to the clamor of a Roman battlefield, nor to the bustling throngs of the Forum, but to a quieter, more intimate space. We will gently step into the pre-dawn hours of a man often called the philosopher king, the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius. We will go back in time with this amazing emperor, on how he welcomed the day, in a slow and simple way. Chapter 1: The First Stirrings of Dawn, a Quiet Awakening. In the heart of Rome, where the grandeur of empire cast long shadows, there lay, for a fleeting time each day, a profound and sacred stillness. This was the hour before the city truly awakened, before the clamor of carts on cobblestones, before the distant shouts of merchants, before the lowing of cattle driven to market, before the very breath of 1,000,000 souls began to stir in earnest. It was a silence rarely known, even in the vast and ancient halls of the imperial palace on the Palatine Hill. Within these very walls, in a chamber perhaps less opulent than one might imagine for the ruler of the known world, lay a man who, even in slumber, carried the immense weight of the Roman Empire. Marcus Aurelius. Not the formidable emperor of legions and laws, not the weary statesman burdened by petitions, but simply a human being, suspended in that fragile state between unconsciousness and the conscious demands of a new day. The air in the chamber hung heavy and cool, a remnant of the night's embrace. The faintest hint of incense, long since burned to ash, might still linger, a ghost of quiet contemplation from the evening before. No lamp burned, no servant stirred. There was only the profound darkness, gradually, almost imperceptibly, softening at the edges. This softening was the first herald of dawn. Not a sudden burst of light, but a slow, patient seep, as if the night itself were gently exhaling its last vestiges. Through a high window, perhaps unadorned by heavy drapes, a faint, milky grey began to push against the obsidian black. The world outside the chamber was still a canvas of hushed tones. The great city of Rome, a sprawling behemoth of stone and life, was, at this moment, largely a silent monument. One might, if listening with a truly discerning ear, catch the faintest whisper of the wind through distant pines, or the almost imperceptible rustle of an ancient ivy vine clinging to the palace walls. But these were sounds swallowed by the immense quiet, mere echoes in the vastness. Within the chamber, the silence was even more profound, broken only by the steady, unhurried rhythm of a sleeper's breath. It was a breath that had carried him through the anxieties of yesterday and now prepared him for the burdens of tomorrow. A breath that, for these precious moments, was merely the breath of a man, not of an emperor. The stillness was not empty, it was pregnant with potential. It held the quiet promise of the coming day, and within it, the silent unfolding of a mind that had chosen, through years of dedicated practice, to meet each new moment with intention and a measured calm. As the light at the window thickened from a whisper to a soft sigh, Marcus Aurelius began his own gentle stirring. This was not the abrupt jolt of a troubled sleeper, nor the frustrated sigh of one resisting the day. Rather, it was a conscious, almost deliberate transition, guided by principles deeply ingrained in his very being. His eyelids, heavy with sleep, might have fluttered, a subtle acknowledgement of the encroaching light, even before full consciousness took hold. The first thoughts that surfaced were not of urgent decrees or political maneuvering. Instead, they were more akin to the soft, steady hum of a well-tuned instrument preparing for its day's purpose. Perhaps the very first awareness was of the warmth of the simple woolen blankets, the familiar texture of his sleeping mat. These were grounding sensations, anchoring him to the present moment, rather than allowing his mind to immediately leap to the morrow's anxieties. This initial phase of awakening was a critical part of his Stoic discipline. It was the moment to claim ownership of his thoughts, to ensure that he, not external circumstances or errant emotions, would set the tone for the day. He understood that the mind, left unchecked, could easily succumb to the day's inherent pressures before it had even begun. With a quiet, inward shift, Marcus Aurelius began the process of conscious thought. It was a practice honed over years, a quiet internal dialogue drawn from the wellspring of his philosophical mentors, Epictetus, Zeno, Seneca. He didn't just wake up, he chose to awaken, consciously inviting reason to guide his first perceptions. He might have, even before fully opening his eyes, recalled a particular Stoic maxim. Perhaps it was one that spoke of the nature of the day. When you arise in the morning, think what a precious privilege it is to be alive, to breathe, to think, to enjoy, to love. Or perhaps another, reminding him of his duty, not as a burden, but as a natural consequence of his existence. At dawn, when you have trouble getting out of bed, tell yourself, I have to go to work, as a human being. What do I have to complain of, if I'm going to do what I was born for, the things I was brought into the world to do? Or is this what I was created for? To huddle under the blankets and stay warm. These were not stern admonishments, but gentle reminders, internal nudges to align his will with the greater good, to embrace the day not as a series of obligations, but as an opportunity for virtuous action. The quiet strength of these thoughts would gently pull him from the depths of sleep, not with urgency, but with purpose. The act of rising for Marcus Aurelius was not a hurried jump from his sleeping place. It was a slow, measured ascent, a mindful transition from horizontal repose to vertical readiness. He might have paused for a moment on the edge of his simple bed, feet flat on the cool stone floor, feeling the solid ground beneath him. This was another small, grounding ritual, connecting with the physical world, acknowledging his presence within it. His gaze, as his eyes fully opened, would not dart around the room, seeking problems or distractions. Instead, it would be steady, perhaps resting first on a blank wall or the faint light at the window. He was consciously choosing what to focus on, directing his attention rather than allowing it to be scattered by the myriad possibilities of the waking world. This quiet, unhurried start was foundational to his Stoic practice. He understood that the first moments of the day were fertile ground for setting intentions. To rush them, to fill them with noise or anxiety, was to lose an invaluable opportunity for self-mastery. The calm he cultivated in these early hours was the wellspring from which he would draw his patience, his reason, and his equanimity throughout the more demanding hours to come. The world beyond his private quarters remained largely in its pre-dawn slumber. One could almost hear the great city breathing, a soft, deep exhalation before the rush of life began. The sounds that might reach his ears were minimal, perhaps the distant cry of a nocturnal bird, or the gentle sigh of a cooler breeze entering an open courtyard. These were not intrusions, but rather subtle reminders of the world's natural rhythms, a quiet backdrop to his internal preparations. He spent these minutes in true solitude, a luxury that would quickly vanish once the demands of his office began. This was his time, unburdened by the expectations of others, purely dedicated to the cultivation of his inner citadel. It was within this quiet fortress of the mind that he would gird himself, not with armor, but with wisdom. The external world, for all its vastness and complexity, was still largely a concept at this hour. His focus was inward, on the landscape of his own consciousness. He was checking the foundations, ensuring they were firm and unyielding, ready to withstand the inevitable tremors of the day. Higher philosophy. Just as the sun did not burst forth in an instant, but rather ascended with steady, inevitable grace, so too did Marcus Aurelius transition into his day. There was no need for haste, no benefit in frantic preparation. The truly prepared mind found its strength in calm, in order, in the measured pace of conscious action. He would acknowledge any lingering drowsiness, any stray thought that tried to pull him back into the realm of dreams or anticipatory worries. But he would acknowledge them without judgment, observing them as passing clouds, and then gently redirect his attention back to the present moment, to the simple act of being. This was the profound wisdom of the Stoics, that true freedom lay not in the absence of external constraints, but in the mastery of one's own internal world. And the dawn, that quiet, transitional hour, was the perfect crucible for forging that mastery anew each day. As the light in the chamber grew stronger, banishing the last deep shadows, Marcus Aurelius would, with a final, conscious breath, complete this sacred, solitary ritual. The emperor had not yet emerged, but the man had. He was awake, he was present, and he was prepared. Not in the hurried, reactive way of the world, but with the quiet resolve of one who understood that the greatest battles were always fought within, and that the dawn offered the first, most crucial victory. He was ready to meet the day, not as a victim of its demands, but as an active participant, guided by reason, anchored by virtue, and imbued with the quiet strength born of a Stoic start. The Roman Empire was stirring, and soon its emperor would step forth. But for these precious moments, he was simply Marcus, observing the first stirrings of dawn, within himself and in the world outside, with a tranquil and open heart. The subtle sounds of the waking world might now become a little clearer. Perhaps the distant crow of a rooster, or the faint, almost imperceptible creak of a distant door opening elsewhere in the vast palace. These were gentle signals, indicating that the city, too, was beginning its ascent from slumber. But for Marcus Aurelius, these sounds were merely part of the natural order, not a call to immediate action, but a quiet confirmation of the unfolding day. His mind, now fully engaged, would likely turn to the day's first practical considerations, but always through the filter of his philosophy. What duties awaited him? What challenges might arise? How could he best serve Rome and humanity with justice and wisdom? These thoughts would form, not as anxieties, but as deliberate questions, opportunities for applying his principles. The Stoic was not one who sought to avoid the world's difficulties, but rather one who sought to meet them with unwavering virtue. And this morning ritual was his daily armature. Each quiet breath, each conscious thought, each deliberate movement was a deliberate act of reinforcing his inner strength. He knew that the empire's stability was not merely in its legions or its laws, but in the moral fortitude of its leaders. And that fortitude began here, in the quietude of dawn. He might take a few moments to simply listen to the quietude of the palace, discerning the subtle shifts as servants began their hushed preparations in distant corridors. The almost silent padding of sandaled feet, the faint clink of pottery being set out for the day's provisions, the low murmur of voices carefully modulated to avoid disturbing the sleeping household. These were not distractions, but merely elements of the tapestry of daily life, observed without judgment. The essence of this quiet awakening was profound self-possession. It was the refusal to be rushed, to be dictated to by the external clock or the demands of others. It was the assertion of his own inner timing, his own rhythm, aligning it with the grander, unhurried rhythm of the universe itself. Just as the sun did not hasten its rise, neither did the Stoic emperor. This discipline extended to his breathing. A few slow, deep breaths, perhaps, to fully oxygenate his mind and body, to bring himself entirely into the present moment. Each inhale a silent acceptance of what is, each exhale a gentle release of what does not serve his purpose. It was a simple yet powerful practice, anchoring him in the here and now, preparing him for whatever challenges the day might present. It was in these early, unhurried moments that Marcus Aurelius often found the clarity to compose the profound thoughts that would later become his meditations. Not as formal decrees, but as personal reflections, reminders to himself on how to live, how to think, how to act with virtue. This was his inner dialogue, his private philosophical ledger. The silence of the dawn was his canvas, his mind his brush, painting the intentions for the day. He was not yet the busy emperor. He was the philosopher, the man seeking wisdom, patiently preparing his soul for the arduous duties ahead. The world could wait. The legions could wait. The petitions could wait. For these sacred moments, it was simply Marcus, the student of life, the practitioner of virtue, greeting the dawn with a quiet reverence and an unshakable inner calm. And so, with his mind settled, his purpose affirmed, and his body gently roused, Marcus Aurelius would finally shift. Not with a burst of energy, but with the quiet, deliberate grace of one who knew the value of every moment. The emperor was ready. The day had begun. And it began, not with chaos, but with the profound, calming stillness of a truly Stoic dawn. The very silence was a testament to his discipline, a silent promise of the wisdom he would bring to the unfolding hours. And so, with his mind settled, his purpose affirmed, and his body gently roused, Marcus Aurelius would finally shift. Not with a burst of energy, but with the quiet, deliberate grace of one who knew the value of every moment. The emperor was ready. The day had begun. And it began, not with chaos, but with the profound, calming stillness of a truly Stoic dawn. The very silence was a testament to his discipline, a silent promise of the wisdom he would bring to the unfolding hours. Chapter 2: The Inner Sanctum, First Thoughts and the Call to Reason. As the physical act of awakening concluded, with Marcus Aurelius now seated on the edge of his simple sleeping place, the true work of the morning began. This was the quiet, invisible labor of the mind, a silent battleground where the day's disposition would be forged. For a Stoic, the inner sanctum of thought was paramount, far more significant than any outward display of power or pomp. Here, in the profound quiet, he would consciously choose his posture for the world. The chamber itself remained bathed in the soft, diffused light of pre-dawn. The air was still cool, carrying a pristine clarity unmarred by the dust and bustle of the waking city. No one disturbed him. This was his inviolable space, a sanctuary of solitude where he could engage in the most crucial of his daily rituals, the meticulous preparation of his mind. He would take a deep, slow breath, feeling the air fill his lungs, then release it with equal deliberation. This was more than just respiration, it was an anchor, rooting him firmly in the present moment, dispelling any lingering wisps of dreams or anticipatory anxieties about the day ahead. Each breath was a conscious re-entry into the reality of the present, a quiet declaration of presence. His gaze, steady and unhurried, might rest upon a blank section of the chamber wall, or the simple texture of the stone floor. He wasn't seeking external stimuli, but rather a neutral canvas upon which to project his internal focus. The Stoics understood the power of attention, that where one directed their focus, there their energy would flow. And in these precious moments, all his energy was directed inward, towards the ordering of his thoughts. He would mentally review the core tenets of his philosophy. Not as a forced recitation, but as a gentle, internal dialogue, inviting the wisdom of Epictetus, Zeno, and Seneca to permeate his consciousness. He recalled that the path to tranquility lay in distinguishing between what was within his control and what was not. His thoughts, his judgments, his actions, these were entirely his own domain. The external world, with its unpredictable events and the actions of others, lay beyond his direct command. This fundamental distinction was his compass. It guided his initial reflections, ensuring that his focus remained on his own internal responses, rather than on the external circumstances that might unfold. One of the most potent practices of his morning was negative pre-visualization, or premeditatio malorum. This was not a morbid dwelling on misfortune, but a deliberate, rational contemplation of potential difficulties. He might consider, for a brief moment, the frustrations he might encounter, the unreasonableness of certain courtiers, the unavoidable tedium of administrative tasks, even the possibility of physical discomfort or setbacks. By mentally acknowledging these potential adversaries, he disarmed them. They became less capable of surprising him, of catching him off guard and eliciting an emotional, Stoic reaction. If he foresaw a difficult conversation, he could mentally rehearse his response, choosing patience over anger, understanding over judgment. If he anticipated a tedious task, he could remind himself of its necessity and the opportunity it presented for diligent work, regardless of his personal inclination. This was a practice not rooted in pessimism, but in profound realism. It was an intellectual inoculation against the day's inevitable challenges, a quiet preparation that fostered resilience before the first obstacle even appeared. It allowed him to greet potential adversity not with shock, but with a settled resolve. His thoughts would also turn to the nature of human beings. He understood that he would interact with many individuals throughout the day, some wise, some foolish, some kind, some perhaps even malicious. Rather than allowing himself to be irritated by their imperfections, he would remind himself of their shared humanity, of the common frailties and virtues that bound them together. Begin the day by telling yourself, "I shall meet with meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, envious, unsocial men. All these things happen to them by reason of their ignorance of what is good and evil." This famous line from his meditations wasn't a lament, but a practical reminder. It allowed him to approach others with a gentle understanding, anticipating their flaws, not to condemn them, but to temper his own reactions. He chose compassion and patience as his initial stance, rather than irritation or judgment. This was a profound act of mental preparedness, shifting his default reaction from one of personal offense to one of philosophical detachment and benevolent acceptance. It set him up to navigate the complexities of human interaction with equanimity, preserving his inner peace even amidst discord. His focus would then broaden to his role and duties. Not the grand, overwhelming scope of empire, but the specific, actionable tasks of this particular day. He would remind himself of his purpose: to serve, to govern justly, to apply reason and virtue in all his decisions. This was his telos, his ultimate aim as a human being and as a leader. He understood that his authority was a trust, not a personal indulgence. Every action, every word, every decision had ripple effects across the vast Roman world. Therefore, the purity of his intentions, the clarity of his judgment, and the steadfastness of his character were paramount. These were cultivated in these quiet moments, before the world's demands could press in. He was preparing himself, not to conquer, but to endure. Not to dominate, but to guide. Not to react impulsively, but to respond with reasoned wisdom. The vastness of his responsibilities was met with the focused intensity of his personal philosophy. This meditative period wasn't about solving specific problems yet. It was about sharpening the tools of his mind, ensuring they were ready for whatever problems the day might present. He was honing his reason, strengthening his resolve, and deepening his understanding of his place in the grand scheme of things. He would reflect on the impermanence of all things, of power, of life itself. This seemingly somber reflection was, for the Stoic, a source of liberation, not despair. By acknowledging the fleeting nature of existence, he was freed from attachment to external outcomes, from fear of loss, and from the anxieties that plagued those who clung to transient things. He was preparing to meet all events, good or bad, with an even mind, understanding them as part of the natural flow of the universe. This was the quiet triumph of the Stoic, to find peace not by escaping reality, but by embracing it, in all its unpredictable fullness, from the first conscious breath of dawn. The silence in the chamber, profound moments earlier, now seemed to deepen further, not from absence, but from a profound internal focus. The gentle hum of the awakening city outside remained a distant, unobtrusive murmur. Marcus Aurelius was not listening to the world, he was listening to himself, to the quiet dictates of his own reason. He would internally rehearse his commitment to virtue, to courage in the face of fear, to justice in all dealings, to temperance in his desires, and to practical wisdom in his judgments. These were not abstract concepts but living principles that he sought to embody in every action, every thought, throughout the coming hours. He was building his moral armor, piece by careful piece, in the quiet solitude of his mind. This mental exercise was his shield against the inevitable onslaught of distractions, temptations, and frustrations that a day as emperor would surely bring. He was not hoping for a calm day. He was cultivating a calm mind to face any kind of day. As the light from the window strengthened, casting softer, clearer definitions on the simple furnishings of his room, Marcus Aurelius would conclude this intensely personal period of reflection. He had faced himself, examined his intentions, and armed his mind with the philosophical tools necessary to navigate the complexities of the world. He had performed his duty to himself first, ensuring his inner citadel was secure. The mental exercises he performed were not merely intellectual pursuits, they were vital, life-sustaining practices that empowered him to remain steadfast, clear-headed, and virtuous, no matter the storm. This inner sanctum of his mind, meticulously tended to each dawn, was the true seat of his power. It was here that he cultivated the resilience to withstand political intrigue, the wisdom to deliver just rulings, and the patience to endure the endless demands of his office. He understood that leadership began not with outward commands, but with inward discipline. He might take a moment to consider the brief span of life, the fleeting nature of time. Not to induce melancholy, but to imbue each conscious moment with a profound sense of purpose. This very day, this very hour, was a gift, an opportunity to live well, to act virtuously, to make a positive impact. And that impact began with the careful, deliberate shaping of his own thoughts, right here in the quiet. The subtle sounds of the awakening palace, once mere whispers, might now become a faint, soft hum. The distant, muted sound of footsteps in a far-off corridor, the quiet clinking of something being moved, all still muffled by the thick stone walls. These were not disruptive, but merely external echoes of the world that would soon fully awaken. He heard them, acknowledged them, but did not allow them to hasten his internal process. His mental review would extend to the concept of sympathia, the Stoic idea of the interconnectedness of all things. He was part of a larger whole, a cog in the grand machine of the cosmos. His duties were not isolated burdens, but contributions to the harmony of the universe. This perspective fostered a sense of calm acceptance and purpose, diminishing the sense of individual struggle. The very act of sitting, breathing, and thinking in this profound silence was a form of active meditation. It wasn't about emptying the mind, but about filling it with the right things: reason, virtue, purpose, and acceptance. It was a deliberate choice to engage with the world from a place of inner strength and clarity, rather than reacting from a place of unchecked emotion or external pressure. He was like a craftsman meticulously sharpening his tools before beginning a complex project. Each mental exercise was a stroke, refining the edge of his perception, making it capable of cutting through confusion and illusion. He knew that the clarity forged in these quiet moments would serve him throughout the demanding, often chaotic, hours that lay ahead. With a final, deep, unhurried breath, Marcus Aurelius would conclude this vital period of mental preparation. His mind was now his own. His thoughts were ordered, his intentions clear, his resolve fortified. He had reminded himself of his principles, prepared for potential challenges, and affirmed his purpose. The inner sanctum had been cleansed, fortified, and readied. He was, in essence, a fully charged vessel, ready to navigate the currents of the day, not merely to drift, but to steer with firm and reasoned hand. The silence, which had been his companion, would soon give way to the murmurs of the court. But the peace it had instilled within him would remain. The man who would soon emerge from this private chamber was not simply the Emperor Marcus Aurelius. He was a philosopher king, deeply rooted in the wisdom of the past, fully present in the reality of the now, and consciously prepared for the uncertainties of the future. His inner sanctum, now vibrant with ordered thought, was ready to face the world. He had performed the most important duty of his morning, mastering himself. And with that silent victory, he was ready for whatever the day, and the vast Roman Empire, would bring. The profound stillness of his private space began to yield to the subtle, almost imperceptible stirrings of the palace. Footsteps, hushed voices, the distant clang of metal, all still faint, yet signaling the imminent arrival of his retinue. But Marcus Aurelius would meet these external sounds not with a start, but with a settled readiness. His mind, now his own, was prepared for interaction. The call to reason had been answered, and the day, in its quiet, deliberate manner, was fully upon him. Chapter 3: The Simple Necessities, a Spartan Routine. Having tended to the inner sanctum of his mind, Marcus Aurelius now turned his attention to the simple necessities of his physical form. For a Stoic, the body was a vessel, a tool for virtuous action, and its care was approached with practicality and moderation, devoid of any hint of indulgence or vanity. This was not the opulent bathing ritual of a decadent emperor, but the spare, efficient routine of a man who understood that true dignity lay not in luxury, but in self-control. The chamber, now bathed in the gentle, even light of early morning, revealed its inherent simplicity. There were no elaborate tapestries, no gilded ornaments gleaming in the nascent light. The furnishings were functional, made of honest materials like wood and stone, reflecting a philosophy that valued utility over ostentation. Every object had a purpose, serving the needs of the man, not his desires. He would rise from his sleeping mat, not with a sudden movement, but with a deliberate, unhurried grace. Each muscle engaging, each joint articulating, he would feel the cool stone floor beneath his bare feet. This tactile connection to the solid earth was another grounding moment, a quiet acknowledgement of his physical presence in the world, unburdened by the demands of the day yet to fully unfold. His first act of personal care would be equally straightforward. A small, unadorned basin, perhaps of clay or a simple metal, would be ready. A plain jug of cool, fresh water would sit beside it, drawn from the palace's own aqueduct system, a quiet testament to Roman engineering marvels that brought comfort to even the most humble citizens. There was no need for scented oils, no rich soaps, no array of servants attending to every whim. This was a private moment, a solitary act of cleansing, designed to refresh the body and prepare it for its day's work. The water itself, cool and clear, was a symbol of purity and renewal. He would slowly pour a modest amount of water into the basin. The gentle gurgle of the liquid, the soft splash as it met the clay, would be among the very first distinct sounds of his waking day. These natural sounds were calming, rhythmic, a soothing prelude to the city's eventual clamor. With a measured hand, he would cup the cool water, bringing it to his face. The brisk touch against his skin would be invigorating, a subtle jolt to awaken the last vestiges of sleep. He would rinse his face, perhaps rub his eyes gently, allowing the water to carry away the quiet accumulation of the night. This was not a hurried splash, but a deliberate, almost meditative act. The feel of the water, its temperature, its simple cleansing power, these were sensations he would fully acknowledge. For a Stoic, every mundane act was an opportunity for mindfulness, a chance to be fully present. There was no distraction, no wandering of thought. This simple washing was an act of complete attention, a small dedication to the temple of his body. The water, once used, would be poured away, perhaps into a small drain or a waiting vessel. The basin, emptied, would be left to dry naturally. No fuss, no excess. Just the essential, performed with purpose and quiet dignity. His hair, simple and often kept short or brushed back, would receive similar, unfussy attention. No elaborate arrangements, no complex tools. Perhaps a simple comb made of wood or bone, or merely his fingers, to tidy it. The idea was not to adorn, but to present himself cleanly and unencumbered, ready for the serious business of the day. The very absence of luxury in these personal rituals was a powerful statement of his philosophy. It underscored his belief that true worth lay not in external possessions or superficial appearances, but in the cultivation of one's character. An emperor who could find contentment in such simple necessities was an emperor truly free from the chains of desire and expectation. This Spartan routine was a daily reinforcement of his commitment to moderation. It was a conscious rejection of the excesses that often accompanied power, a quiet rebellion against the temptation to indulge in sensory pleasures merely because they were available. He chose simplicity, not out of deprivation, but out of principle. Next came his attire. Not the purple-dyed toga of ceremony, nor the elaborate robes of state. For his private mourning, and indeed often for much of his day-to-day work within the palace, Marcus Aurelius would select a simple, practical tunic. Made of undyed wool or linen, its texture would be plain, its cut functional. It was designed for comfort and utility, not for display. He would slip it over his head, feeling the familiar weight and texture of the fabric against his skin. This act was swift and efficient. No complex fastenings, no layers of costly silks. The tunic represented his essential self, unadorned by the trappings of empire. It was the garment of a Roman citizen, a philosopher, a man dedicated to duty rather than show. This choice of simple clothing reflected a profound Stoic lesson, that a person's worth comes from within, from their virtue and reason, not from the external embellishments of wealth or status. The fabric might be coarse, the cut unpretentious, but it clothed an emperor of immense inner discipline. Finally, his footwear. Simple sandals of practical leather, designed for comfort and durability rather than elaborate decoration. He would strap them to his feet, feeling the familiar leather against his skin. The soles would be sturdy, providing a reliable connection to the ground beneath him. This entire sequence of washing and dressing was performed with a quiet intentionality. There was no hurriedness, no fumbling. Each movement was deliberate, purposeful, infused with the calm focus that had characterized his earlier mental exercises. The routine was a physical manifestation of his philosophical commitment to order and simplicity. He was preparing his body to serve his mind, ensuring it was clean, comfortable, and unburdened by unnecessary distractions. The simplicity of his attire was a constant, unspoken reminder to himself of his true priorities: reason, virtue, and service. There might be a brief pause after dressing, a final, full breath before the first external interaction of the day. A moment to feel the weight of his simple clothing, the readiness of his body. This pause was not for admiring his appearance, but for a final check of his composure, an internal affirmation of his preparedness. He understood that true strength lay not in grand gestures or elaborate displays, but in the consistent application of principle to every aspect of life, no matter how small or mundane. The emperor who could find wisdom in the act of washing his face, or selecting a plain tunic, was an emperor truly aligned with the natural order of things. This Spartan routine was his personal fortress against the insidious creep of luxury and self-indulgence. It ensured that his focus remained outward, on his duties to Rome and to humanity, rather than inward on personal comforts. The quiet sounds of the palace, which had been distant whispers, might now become a little more distinct, the very faint sound of sandaled footsteps in the corridor outside, a hushed cough, the distant clang of a bucket being moved. These were not intrusions, but rather the gentle symphony of the awakening imperial household, a quiet backdrop to his sustained inner peace. He was ready to step out, not as a figure of imperial splendor, but as a man of quiet resolve. His physical appearance was a reflection of his inner philosophy, disciplined, unpretentious, and entirely focused on purpose. He carried himself not with arrogance, but with the quiet dignity of someone who was comfortable in his own skin, unconcerned with the judgments of others. This deliberate simplicity in his personal care was a powerful daily lesson for himself. It reminded him that true happiness and contentment were not found in accumulating possessions or indulging in fleeting pleasures, but in living a life of virtue, wisdom, and moderation. The clean water, the simple fabric, the sturdy sandals, these were symbols of a life unburdened by excess. He understood that true freedom came from being independent of external things. If he could find contentment in the simplest of routines, then the most lavish of circumstances would not corrupt him, nor the most austere of conditions break his spirit. He was preparing not just his body, but reinforcing his autarkeia, his self-sufficiency, a core Stoic virtue. The atmosphere in his private quarters, though now brighter, retained its sense of profound quiet. The morning stillness was not yet broken by the specific demands of his imperial office. He had built a fortress of calm, starting with his mind, and now extending to the careful, unhurried preparation of his physical self. Each folding of a discarded sleeping garment, each drop of water from the basin, each fastening of a sandal strap, was a small, conscious act. There was no thought for what lay immediately ahead, no hurried anticipation of the day's first meeting. Only the present moment, executed with mindfulness and a deep, abiding sense of purpose. This daily ritual of simplicity was a constant act of remembering. Remembering who he was, beyond the title and the power. Remembering his commitment to live in accordance with nature, to follow reason, and to serve humanity. His routine was not a burden, but a path, a daily affirmation of his chosen way of life. He was preparing himself to be clear-headed, unencumbered, and fully present for the challenges that awaited him. The physical acts of his morning routine were a quiet prelude to the mental and moral strength he would soon call upon. He ensured his body was ready to support his mind's endeavors. With his body cleansed, his simple attire donned, and his physical being made ready, Marcus Aurelius would stand, perhaps for a final, brief moment, in the center of his quiet chamber. He was no longer solely the philosopher of the dawn, but the man preparing to take on the mantle of emperor. He had performed the necessary, simple acts of care with intention and dignity. He was ready to meet the day's demands with a body that felt clean and unburdened, and a mind that had been meticulously prepared. The Spartan routine had played its part, cementing his resolve and strengthening his inner calm. The rustle of his simple tunic might be the only sound as he took a final, deep breath before approaching the chamber door. The world outside was indeed stirring more audibly now, a distant carriage, a faint call from a guard. But these sounds would not hasten his deliberate pace. He was ready, not because the world demanded it, but because his philosophy guided it. He understood that mastery over oneself, even in the smallest, most mundane acts, was the truest form of power. And having quietly mastered the simple necessities, Marcus Aurelius was now poised, in his own unhurried time, to step forward and meet the burgeoning day. 18:30 to 8 p.m. Visual, maintain the deep green to blue or fade to black. Perhaps a very subtle, almost imperceptible shimmering effect in the center of the dark screen, representing continued inner peace and clarity. The chamber, now empty of his immediate presence, retained a sense of quiet order, a silent testament to the principles that governed its occupant. The simple acts of washing and dressing, performed without fanfare or indulgence, were not mere routines, but fundamental components of a life lived deliberately, calmly, and with unwavering commitment to virtue. The emperor was ready, having reaffirmed his Stoic commitment to a life of measured simplicity. Chapter 4: The First Sustenance, a Modest Breakfast and Nourishing the Body. With his mind prepared and his body readied through simple, mindful acts, Marcus Aurelius now turned to the first nourishment of the day. This was not a feast, nor even a complex meal, but a modest breakfast, approached with the same quiet intentionality that marked all his morning rituals. For the Stoic, food was fuel, a means to sustain the body's capacity for reason and virtuous action, rather than a source of excessive pleasure or indulgence. The setting would be equally unassuming. Perhaps a small, sturdy wooden table in a corner of his private quarters, or even a simple low plinth. The quiet atmosphere of his chamber, recently vacated by the deeper shadows of night, now welcomed the subtle warmth of the rising day. The air carried no scent of lavish cooking, only the clean, cool freshness of the morning. The sounds, too, were minimal. The gentle clink of a modest bowl being placed, perhaps the soft rustle of a napkin made of simple linen. These were not the hurried sounds of a bustling kitchen, but the quiet preparations of a solitary man, attending to a fundamental human need with thoughtful moderation. His breakfast would consist of the simplest, most wholesome provisions available. There would be bread, likely a rustic loaf, perhaps made from barley or a coarser wheat, baked with a firm crust and a dense, nourishing crumb. It was the staff of life for many Romans, a staple born of toil and earth. Its presence on his humble table was a reminder of the fundamental resources that sustained all life. He would break a piece from the loaf, feeling the texture of its crust, the yielding softness of its interior. This was not a delicate tearing, but a practical breaking, a direct interaction with the food that would provide him strength. The aroma of baked grain, subtle and earthy, would fill the immediate space around him. Accompanying the bread, there might be a few olives, dark and rich, or a small handful of dried figs or dates, offering natural sweetness and energy. These were simple, wholesome foods, products of the land, requiring little preparation, and offering ample sustenance. They were chosen for their practical value, not their exotic appeal. A small cup of water, fresh and cool from the aqueduct, would complete the meal. No rich wines, no sweetened concoctions. Just pure, clean water, quenching thirst and aiding digestion. The sound of it being poured, a gentle stream into the ceramic cup, would be a quiet, soothing accompaniment to the quiet meal. As he brought the food to his mouth, Marcus Aurelius would engage in a mindful act of eating. He would taste the subtle flavors of the bread, the earthiness of the grain, the crispness of the crust. He would savor the briny burst of an olive, or the concentrated sweetness of a dried fig. This was not about pleasure for pleasure's sake, but about acknowledging the nourishment, appreciating the simple goodness of the provisions. He understood that the body, like the mind, required proper attention, but always within the bounds of moderation. To overindulge was to become a slave to desire, to distract oneself from the higher pursuits of reason and virtue. His modest breakfast was a daily declaration of independence from gluttony and excess. For a Stoic, even the act of eating was an opportunity for philosophical reflection. Marcus Aurelius might recall Epictetus's wisdom: demand not that events should happen as you wish, but wish them to happen as they do happen, and you will be serene. This applied even to the basic act of eating. He ate what was provided, with gratitude, and found contentment in its simple sufficiency. He might also silently reflect on the journey of the food from earth to table, the farmer's labor, the baker's craft, the natural processes of sun and rain. This fostered a deep sense of connection to the world and a profound appreciation for the interconnectedness of all things. It transformed a mere biological necessity into an act of quiet reverence. There was no hurried consumption, no distractions. Each bite was deliberate, each sip mindful. The rhythm of his eating was slow, steady, in harmony with the gentle pace of the awakening day. This was a private moment of communion with the sustenance that would power his mind and body for the hours ahead. The quietness of his breakfast was almost profound. There were no conversations, no scroll reading. This was a time for singular focus on the act of nourishing his body. He understood that true nourishment involved not just the physical intake of food, but also the mental posture with which it was received. His meditations are replete with reminders to himself about moderation and the true nature of desires. He knew that the pursuit of elaborate meals or sensory gratification could easily lead one astray from the path of virtue. His Spartan breakfast was a daily exercise in resisting such temptations, a quiet affirmation of his commitment to self-mastery. He ate until satisfied, not until full. This distinction was crucial for the Stoic. Satisfaction was a state of contentment, recognizing when the body had received what it needed. Fullness, on the other hand, often implied excess, a surrender to appetite rather than reason. He lived by the principle that man should be content with what is sufficient. As he concluded his meal, there was no lingering over a final course, no desire for more. The small plate would be cleared, the cup emptied. The simplicity of the clean-up mirrored the simplicity of the meal itself. There was no waste, no undue ceremony. Just the quiet completion of a necessary act. This was a practice in self-discipline that extended beyond the breakfast table. It reinforced his broader philosophical approach to life, to appreciate what one has, to live within one's means, and to find contentment in sufficiency. The emperor who could practice such restraint at his own table was an emperor capable of guiding his vast empire with similar wisdom and moderation. The subtle sounds of the palace continued to stir around him, now perhaps a little more distinctly, the distant clang of a heavy gate, the muffled shouts of guards preparing for their shifts. But these sounds did not penetrate the calm bubble of his private space, still dedicated to quiet, internal processes. With his body now nourished and his mind calm, Marcus Aurelius would rise from his modest breakfast. He felt the quiet strength that came from having met a fundamental need without excess, without distraction. The energy from the simple bread and olives would begin to course through him, preparing him for the mental and physical demands of the coming hours. He was ready to engage with the world, not with the sluggishness of overindulgence, but with the clarity and lightness that came from a modest, mindful start. His senses were keen, his mind alert, unclouded by the heaviness of a rich meal. This was the optimal state for clear thought and decisive action. The quiet discipline of his breakfast reflected a core Stoic belief that true satisfaction is not found in the quantity or richness of what one consumes, but in the gratitude with which it is received and the purpose for which it is used. Every bite was an act of gratitude, every simple ingredient a blessing from nature. He understood that his body was not merely for pleasure, but for service. To keep it healthy, strong, and unburdened was a duty, enabling him to better serve Rome and apply his philosophical principles to the governance of his vast empire. The modest meal was a commitment to this duty. The tranquility of these moments before the official duties began was invaluable. It was here, in the quiet consumption of simple food, that he reinforced his resilience against the seductions of the material world. He built an inner resistance to the clamor for more, for better, for richer, which so often entrapped those in positions of power. His choice was always for sufficiency, for what was truly needed, rather than what was merely desired. This extended not just to food, but to all aspects of his life. It was a daily exercise in freedom, freeing himself from external dependencies and cultivating a rich, independent inner life. The air in the chamber now felt truly awake, filled with the fresh promise of the new day. The sounds outside were slowly, steadily increasing in frequency and volume, a gentle crescendo signaling the city's full awakening. But within Marcus Aurelius's private space, the calm persisted, unwavering. He had performed the necessary acts of nourishing his body, without fuss, without complaint, and with profound awareness. He was not just eating, he was mindfully sustaining the instrument through which his reason and virtue would be expressed throughout the day. The quiet dignity of his breakfast routine was a testament to his lived philosophy. It demonstrated that even the most fundamental human acts could be imbued with purpose and wisdom. He approached every moment, every necessity, as an opportunity to practice his Stoic virtues. He was now entirely present, entirely calm, and entirely ready. His body felt light and energized, his mind clear and focused. The simple sustenance had done its work, providing the physical foundation for the demanding day ahead. The quiet satisfaction of having eaten simply and mindfully settled within him. He had taken what was given, expressed gratitude, and prepared his physical being without falling prey to indulgence. This quiet victory over appetite was as significant as any over an external foe. He had reaffirmed his commitment to moderation, his independence from luxury, and his appreciation for the fundamental gifts of nature. His breakfast was not just a meal, it was a daily lesson in contentment and self-control. Chapter 5: The Scroll and the Lamp, Wisdom for the Morning Mind. With his body nourished and his mind settled from its earlier meditations, Marcus Aurelius now sought a different kind of sustenance, the timeless wisdom preserved in the ancient scrolls. This was a quiet pilgrimage into the minds of those who had come before him, philosophers, thinkers, poets, whose words offered guidance, perspective, and solace. In the early morning quiet, this act of reading was a profound communion, a silent conversation with the greatest intellects of history. The chamber, now fully awakened by the soft light of morning, retained its essential simplicity. A small, functional wooden stand or lectern might be brought near, or perhaps he would simply rest the scroll upon his lap as he sat, upright and attentive. The air was still, undisturbed by the city's eventual clamor, allowing for complete absorption. The selection of a scroll was, itself, a deliberate act. It might be a work of Epictetus, his revered teacher whose discourses had so profoundly shaped his own philosophy. Or perhaps a passage from the ancient Greek tragedians, whose tales explored the enduring human condition. Each choice was a conscious decision to invite a particular kind of wisdom into his morning. If the light was still too dim, or if he preferred the intimate glow for focused study, a simple oil lamp would be lit. Not a grand, multi-branched candelabra, but a humble lamp, perhaps of clay or plain bronze. The tiny flame, once kindled, would cast a soft, dancing circle of light, illuminating the parchment and creating a private sphere of warmth and focus within the quiet room. The process of lighting it would be unhurried, the careful placement of the wick, the gentle striking of flint against steel, or the touch of an ember from a brazier. The soft flicker, the subtle scent of olive oil as it began to burn cleanly, these were small, sensory details that underscored the tranquil atmosphere. The lamp was a companion in his pursuit of wisdom, a silent sentinel against the lingering darkness of ignorance. The very act of reading from a scroll was different from our modern experience with books. A scroll had to be carefully unrolled with one hand while being rolled up with the other, a slow, tactile process that enforced a deliberate pace. It was a physical engagement with the text, adding another layer to the mental absorption. The gentle rustle of the parchment as he unrolled it would be a distinct, soothing sound. The texture of the aged material, dry and slightly brittle, would be felt beneath his fingertips. His eyes would then fall upon the lines of ancient script, symbols of profound thought laid out across the page. He would read slowly, deliberately. This was not a hurried scan for information, but a deep immersion, a chewing over of each phrase, each sentence. He wasn't merely absorbing words, he was internalizing concepts, allowing the wisdom of the ancients to seep into his consciousness. His meditations are a testament to this practice, often directly quoting or paraphrasing the Stoics he admired. He might pause, his gaze resting on a particular line, allowing its meaning to fully resonate within him. Perhaps a passage from Epictetus on controlling one's perceptions. Men are disturbed, not by things, but by the principles and notions which they form concerning things. Such a line, read in the quiet of dawn, would serve as a powerful reminder to approach the day's events with reasoned judgment rather than emotional reactivity. The lamp's gentle glow would delineate his world, creating a sphere of focused study, separating him from the still sleeping palace. The sounds of the awakening world, the distant chirping of birds, the faint clatter of a guard's gear, would remain at the periphery, held at bay by the intensity of his concentration. This reading was a form of active meditation. It was not a passive reception of information, but a rigorous engagement with ideas. He sought not to agree blindly, but to understand deeply, to integrate the wisdom into his own lived experience. He was a student first, an emperor second, constantly striving to refine his understanding of virtue and the nature of reality. The act of turning a page, or carefully rolling and unrolling sections of the scroll, was itself a rhythmic, calming motion. The soft whisper of parchment against parchment, the gentle adjustment of the lamp for better light, these small acts contributed to the atmosphere of focused, unhurried study. His engagement with the texts was deeply personal. These were not mere academic exercises, but practical guides for living. He was seeking answers to the pressing questions of existence: how to face adversity, how to act justly, how to find tranquility amidst chaos. The Stoic texts offered not abstract theories, but actionable principles for navigating the human condition. He might find solace in a passage about the transient nature of life, or the inevitability of change. Instead of fear, these reflections instilled a quiet acceptance, a deeper appreciation for the present moment. The words on the scroll became a mirror, reflecting his own thoughts and affirming his chosen path. This period of reading was a vital counterpoint to the demands of his later hours. It allowed him to replenish his intellectual and moral reserves, to ground himself in timeless truths before entering the fleeting and often tumultuous world of imperial administration. As the light outside the window grew from a soft glow to the clear, unambiguous brightness of morning, the lamp's flame might begin to wane, its purpose fulfilled. Its gentle light would merge seamlessly with the natural light, a quiet transition from focused illumination to diffused clarity. The subtle scent of the lamp, too, would slowly dissipate, leaving behind the fresh, crisp air of the new day. Marcus Aurelius would carefully roll the scroll, securing it once more with its tie. This was an act of reverence, a respectful return of wisdom to its silent keeping. He would place it back in its container or on a designated shelf, ensuring its preservation for future moments of study. The wisdom gleaned from the texts would not be forgotten, it would be integrated into his very being, ready to be called upon in the practicalities of the day. The words read in the quiet of dawn would echo in his thoughts, guiding his judgments and shaping his responses to the world. This daily communion with the ancient Stoics was more than just reading, it was a form of ongoing education for the soul. He was constantly reminding himself of his fundamental principles, reinforcing his commitment to reason and virtue. In a world full of distractions and temptations, these moments of quiet study served as an anchor, keeping him steadfast. He recognized that knowledge was not merely for accumulation, but for application. The wisdom contained within the scrolls was meant to be lived, breathed, and embodied in every action. His morning reading was the deliberate act of preparing himself to be the philosophy, not just to understand it. The very silence that enveloped him during this period of study was itself a gift. It allowed for a depth of concentration rarely achieved in the bustling hours of the day. The world could wait. The demands of empire could wait. For these precious moments, it was just Marcus, the student, absorbing the lessons that transcended time and circumstance. He would reflect on the enduring nature of truth, how the insights of philosophers born centuries before him still held profound relevance for his own life and leadership. This connection across time fostered a sense of continuity and a deeper appreciation for the human pursuit of wisdom. His mind, now enriched by the philosophical texts, felt sharp and clear, ready for the complex decisions and interactions that lay ahead. He had intentionally filled it with what was good, what was true, what was beneficial for his soul and his duty. This intellectual nourishment was as vital as the physical sustenance he had taken earlier. He had performed his duty to his own intellectual and moral growth, ensuring that he approached the day not with an empty mind or an unexamined heart, but with a cultivated wisdom. The ideas absorbed would serve as a quiet guide, an internal compass pointing him towards justice, temperance, and courage. The subtle sounds of the palace, though still distant, were now more varied, the soft shuffling of feet, the faint murmur of voices, the occasional clink of a bucket or a tool. These were the gentle stirrings of his vast imperial household, beginning its day. But these sounds would no longer interrupt his deep concentration, for his period of focused study was gently drawing to a close. He had extracted the essence of the texts, not memorized them verbatim, but allowed their core principles to sink deeply into his understanding. He was not just reading Stoicism, he was living it, starting with a quiet, deliberate act of preparing his mind each morning. With a final, deep breath, Marcus Aurelius would set aside his thoughts of the texts. The wisdom was now within him, integrated and ready for application. He had sought the guidance of reason, learned from the experiences of others, and fortified his own resolve. He was now prepared, not just outwardly in his attire, but inwardly in the very fabric of his thought. The scroll and the lamp had played their part, transforming raw potential into cultivated wisdom, ready to meet the burgeoning day. With a final, deep breath, Marcus Aurelius would set aside his thoughts of the texts. The wisdom was now within him, integrated and ready for application. He had sought the guidance of reason, learned from the experiences of others, and fortified his own resolve. He was now prepared, not just outwardly in his attire, but inwardly in the very fabric of his thought. The scroll and the lamp had played their part, transforming raw potential into cultivated wisdom, ready to meet the burgeoning day. With a final, deep breath, Marcus Aurelius would set aside his thoughts of the texts. The wisdom was now within him, integrated and ready for application. He had sought the guidance of reason, learned from the experiences of others, and fortified his own resolve. He was now prepared, not just outwardly in his attire, but inwardly in the very fabric of his thought. The scroll and the lamp had played their part, transforming raw potential into cultivated wisdom, ready to meet the burgeoning day. The chamber, now empty of his immediate presence, seemed to hum with the lingering resonance of profound thought. The soft light, which had facilitated his study, now filled the space with a quiet radiance. The philosopher king, steeped in ancient wisdom, was fully prepared to step out and bring the calm certainty of his Stoic mind to the demands of the Roman world, fortified by the scroll and the lamp. Chapter 6: The Imperial Household Stirs, Subtle Interactions and Early Duties. Having prepared his mind and body, and having fortified his soul with ancient wisdom, Marcus Aurelius was now poised at the quiet threshold of his day. Beyond the humble door of his private chamber lay the vast, sprawling labyrinth of the imperial palace, a city within a city, now gradually stirring from its deep slumber. This was the precise moment when his solitary tranquility would begin to merge with the subtle awakening of the world he governed. The silence that had been his constant companion for the early hours now began to yield, not to a sudden clamor, but to a delicate symphony of muted sounds. From distant corridors, faint echoes would reach him, the soft, almost imperceptible padding of sandaled feet on polished marble, a hushed whisper carried on the morning air, the gentle clink of pottery being set out for the day's first provisions. These were the first movements of a colossal household, meticulously trained to maintain an aura of quiet efficiency, especially around the emperor's private quarters. The air, too, began to shift. The cool stillness of dawn was gently replaced by a subtle, warmer energy, a quiet hum that spoke of purposeful activity slowly gathering momentum. This was the palace breathing, awakening, preparing for the intricate dance of imperial administration. Marcus Aurelius would take a final, deep breath, anchoring himself once more in his cultivated tranquility. He knew that the demands of the world were about to begin, but he would meet them on his own terms, carrying the profound peace forged in his solitary hours. There was no rush, no urgency in his movements. His equanimity was his shield against the external world's potential to disrupt his inner calm. Then, with a gentle, almost imperceptible hand, he would open the door to his chamber. The movement itself would be quiet, the faint creak of ancient wood, the soft click of a latch. It was a subtle invitation for the world to approach, a quiet signal that the emperor was ready. Just outside his door, his most trusted personal attendants would likely be waiting. Not a crowd, but a small, select group, chosen for their discretion, their reliability, and their understanding of the emperor's quiet rhythms. Perhaps a freedman, a loyal slave, or a close secretary. Their presence would be respectful, their postures attentive, yet unobtrusive. Their greeting would be equally muted. A respectful bow, a quiet acknowledgement. No booming salutations, no elaborate pronouncements. Ave, Imperator, perhaps, whispered softly, or merely a silent gesture of deference. Marcus Aurelius would respond with a quiet nod, a composed glance that conveyed both recognition and a subtle expectation of continued order. These first interactions were brief, purely functional. They would involve simple reports, confirmation of the morning's schedule, perhaps a note on a pressing dispatch that had arrived during the night, or the quiet confirmation that certain individuals were awaiting his presence. The exchange of information would be concise, direct, and delivered with utmost efficiency. He would listen attentively, his gaze steady, his demeanor composed. No questions would be asked that could be answered later. No decisions made that required further contemplation. This was merely an initial intake of the day's landscape, a quiet gathering of the first threads of information that would later weave into the complex tapestry of imperial governance. The subtle sounds of the awakening palace would grow a little clearer now that his door was open. The distant hum of life, once almost imperceptible, was now a quiet, continuous murmur. The occasional distinct sound, the very faint jingle of keys, the distant call of a vendor outside the palace walls, muted by stone and distance, would drift into the corridor. These were not distractions, but simply elements of the world accepting its new day. His attendants would be poised to assist him, but their actions would be anticipatory, not intrusive. They understood his preference for self-sufficiency, his Stoic aversion to unnecessary pampering. They were there to facilitate, not to serve with ostentation. This quiet ballet of early morning duties was a testament to the efficient running of the imperial household, a well-oiled machine of hundreds, perhaps thousands, of individuals, all moving with a purpose, yet trained to do so with discretion and respect for the emperor's tranquility. Marcus Aurelius would perhaps begin to walk, his pace unhurried, measured. His sandals would make soft, rhythmic sounds on the polished marble floors of the corridor. Each step was deliberate, a continuation of the mindful movement that characterized his morning. He was not rushing to meet his duties, but calmly walking into them. As he moved through these early corridors, he might pass other attendants or palace officials also beginning their day. Their greetings would be respectful, hushed, recognizing the emperor's quiet presence. He would acknowledge them with a nod, a brief, composed glance. These were not moments for extended conversation, but for silent, mutual understanding of the day's purpose. The visual landscape of the palace interior would subtly shift. The deep shadows of his private chamber gave way to the more expansive, yet still subdued, light of the main corridors. High windows and open courtyards would allow more light to filter in, painting the walls with soft, indirect illumination. The air, too, might grow slightly warmer, carrying the faint scent of stone, ancient wood, and the subtle, earthy aroma of early morning Rome. His first destination might be a small, functional office or a quiet meeting room, a space designed for initial consultations rather than grand audiences. Here, he might receive very brief reports from the prefect of the city, or a military commander, always focused on essential, immediate information that required his initial awareness but not yet his detailed deliberation. The conversations would be sparse, direct. Marcus Aurelius would listen more than he spoke, his mind processing the information with the clarity and composure he had cultivated since dawn. He would not allow himself to be drawn into unnecessary details or emotional reactions. His task was to understand, to assimilate, and to prepare for later, more formal engagement. This was a practice in efficient information intake. He understood that clarity of decision-making relied on a calm mind, unclouded by undue haste or anxiety. The early duties were approached with this principle firmly in place. The subtle sounds of the waking palace would continue to weave their quiet tapestry. The distant clatter of a cleaning crew in a public courtyard, the murmur of water flowing through the palace's numerous fountains, all still muted by distance and the vastness of the stone structure. These were the gentle reminders of the world's natural flow, observed without haste. Marcus Aurelius's posture would remain upright, his movements deliberate. There was no tension in his shoulders, no furrow in his brow. He was present, engaged, yet perfectly calm. He carried the tranquility of his inner sanctum into these burgeoning interactions, allowing it to permeate the space around him. The initial reports would typically be on matters of safety, security, and general order within the city, ensuring the basic functioning of Rome. These were the foundational elements of imperial responsibility, attended to quietly before the more complex political and administrative demands of the day began. These early duties were characterized by their straightforwardness. They were about facts, not opinions, about necessary updates, not lengthy debates. The efficiency of these interactions reflected Marcus Aurelius's own preference for directness and practicality. He conserved his mental and emotional energy for the more profound philosophical challenges and critical imperial decisions that would inevitably arise later in the day. He understood that every moment was an opportunity to practice virtue. Even in these seemingly mundane interactions, he cultivated patience, attentiveness, and a quiet sense of duty. He was not merely receiving reports, he was embodying the principles of good governance, starting with his own composed demeanor. The quiet hum of the palace, the subtle sounds of its inhabitants, all served as a background to Marcus Aurelius's sustained inner peace. He was observing the world awakening around him, but he was not being swept away by its increasing activity. He remained the calm center, the eye of the storm that was the vast Roman Empire. He was like a seasoned helmsman, quietly surveying the horizon before the winds picked up, taking stock of the initial currents, ensuring his vessel was steady and his course charted. This methodical approach allowed him to transition smoothly from profound introspection to practical engagement, without losing his internal equilibrium. The conversations with his early attendants would involve no expressions of personal feeling, no complaints or anxieties. They were exchanges of information, conducted with professionalism and a mutual understanding of duty. Marcus Aurelius set the tone, and his household reflected it, a realm of quiet order, even as it prepared for the day's inherent complexities. He might briefly consider the individual faces of those around him, their unique lives and roles within the vast palace. But his contemplation would be one of empathy and understanding, not judgment. He recognized that each person, like him, was striving to navigate their existence, and he would extend to them the same patience and benevolence he cultivated within himself. As these initial duties concluded, and the first wave of messengers and officials quietly departed, Marcus Aurelius would find himself in another brief lull of calm. The immediate, essential information had been relayed, the initial groundwork laid. He was now fully aware of the day's nascent currents, ready to engage more deeply. The sounds of the palace, though more present, remained well within the bounds of a subdued hum. The bustling energy of mid-morning was still some time away. He had navigated his first interactions with composure, his internal tranquility undisturbed by the subtle stirrings of the world around him. He had demonstrated, in these quiet moments, his profound commitment to living his philosophy. The way he conducted these early interactions, with respect and measured calm, was as much a part of his Stoic practice as his solitary meditations. He was the embodiment of the quiet strength that emanated from a disciplined mind. The world of the imperial palace was indeed stirring, but under the gentle, steady hand of its emperor, it did so with dignity and order. Marcus Aurelius had begun his public day not with a rush, but with a deliberate, composed pace, carrying the peace of his inner sanctum into the vast, awakening heart of Rome. The corridor, though now empty, resonated with the lingering impression of quiet purpose. The faint echoes of hushed voices and soft footsteps dissolved into the pervasive calm of the palace. Marcus Aurelius, having navigated the subtle stirrings of his household with composed presence, was now fully engaged with the unfolding day, his Stoic principles firmly guiding his every interaction, even the earliest and most mundane. Chapter 7: Donning the Mantle, Preparing for the Public Role. Having quietly received the first reports and performed the initial, subtle exchanges with his trusted attendants, Marcus Aurelius now approached another crucial threshold of his morning. This was not a physical doorway into a different room, but a mental transition, a profound internal shift from the private man of contemplation to the public figure of the emperor. It was the moment he would, in the stillness of his mind, truly don the mantles of his imperial duties. The corridor he now traversed might be slightly grander than those immediately outside his private chamber, perhaps adorned with more significant columns or subtle, symbolic carvings. The light, too, would be brighter, filtering more directly from larger windows overlooking inner courtyards, signaling the full arrival of the morning sun across the Palatine Hill. The air would feel subtly different, carrying a faint, distant murmur of voices, now more discernible, hinting at the increasing activity of the vast imperial court. His pace remained unhurried, each step measured and deliberate. There was no sense of external pressure or a need to quicken his movements. His equanimity was paramount, a constant against the rising tide of demands that awaited him. He carried the tranquil composure forged in his early hours into these more public spaces. As he walked, his mind would turn to the immense weight of the office he held. Not with trepidation or self-pity, but with a clear, rational acceptance of his role. He was the emperor, the supreme authority, but also the supreme servant. His power was a trust, his position a duty bestowed upon him by circumstance and fate. He would recall a fundamental Stoic teaching, that our true identity lies not in external roles or titles, but in our character and our reason. The title emperor was merely a label, a temporary assignment. His true self remained the philosopher, the human being striving for virtue. This distinction allowed him to engage with the imperial role without becoming enslaved by its grandeur or its burdens. He understood that true leadership was about guiding, protecting, and serving, not about personal glory or self-aggrandizement. The mantle he was donning was not one of dazzling silk or precious jewels, but one of profound responsibility, woven from the threads of justice, prudence, and courage. He would mentally rehearse the principles that would guide his decisions throughout the day. Justice in all your actions, he might remind himself. Temperance in your desires. Courage in the face of adversity. Wisdom in your judgments. These were not mere platitudes, but living directives, ready to be applied to the complex tapestry of imperial life. He knew that the day would bring countless opportunities to stray from these principles, temptations to anger, to impatience, to self-interest. But his morning preparation had armed him against these internal adversaries. He was consciously choosing his reactions, reaffirming his commitment to responding with reason, rather than allowing himself to be swept away by impulse or external pressure. The air in these main corridors now carried a faint, mixed aroma, perhaps the lingering scent of old stone, a hint of beeswax from polished surfaces, and the faint, earthy smell of the city beyond the palace walls. These were sensory details of the vast realm he was about to fully engage with. This was the quiet, invisible act of transforming from Marcus, the reflective student of philosophy, to Marcus Aurelius, the Emperor of Rome. It was a conscious decision to fully inhabit the role, to embody its gravitas and its responsibilities, while maintaining his inner philosophical detachment. He was in the world of power, but not of it, adhering to the Stoic ideal of living in harmony with nature and reason. He would acknowledge the vastness of the empire, the millions of lives dependent on his judgment. This thought, for a lesser man, might induce overwhelming anxiety. But for Marcus Aurelius, it was a profound call to duty, a reminder of the immense privilege and obligation to serve with the utmost integrity. He accepted this burden, not as a weight to crush him, but as a purpose to define him. The distant sounds of the palace continued to swell, ever so slightly. A distant, muffled conversation, the soft scrape of furniture being rearranged in a nearby office, the rhythmic sweep of a broom in a distant courtyard. These were subtle indicators that the machinery of empire was steadily coming to life. He might mentally review the specific challenges that he knew awaited him this day, a difficult diplomatic matter, a complex legal dispute, a report on military movements. But his approach would be one of rational assessment, not emotional entanglement. Each challenge was an opportunity to apply his principles, to practice wisdom and justice. He had no illusions about the ease of his task. He knew the world was full of unreason, of human error, of unforeseen events. But his stoicism taught him to distinguish between what was within his control, his own reactions, his judgments, his actions, and what was not. And he resolved to focus solely on what lay within his power, releasing attachment to outcomes that were beyond his command. This was the essence of donning the mantle. It was an act of choosing his perspective, reaffirming his moral compass, and preparing his soul to meet the inevitable complexities of imperial life with unwavering fortitude. The physical preparation of his modest tunic and sandals was complete. Now, the mental preparation for the ceremonial toga or the imperial purple was underway. Not the actual garments themselves, but the inner resolve to carry their symbolic weight with dignity and humility. He would embody the office, rather than be consumed by it. He understood that his example was crucial. How he carried himself, how he responded to pressure, how he treated others, these were lessons for his court, for his legions, for the entire populace. His inner calm, cultivated in the dawn, was not merely for his own benefit, but for the stability and virtue of the vast Roman world. The very air in these larger, more public spaces felt different. A sense of expectation, of anticipation, began to subtly permeate the atmosphere. Yet, Marcus Aurelius remained a still point amidst this gentle awakening, radiating a quiet strength. He would consider the concept of sympathia, the interconnectedness of all beings. He was a part of the greater whole, a citizen of the cosmos, and his duty as emperor was a contribution to the universal harmony. This perspective broadened his view beyond personal concerns, imbuing his role with profound, selfless purpose. He was preparing himself to be a good physician to the Roman body politic, diagnosing ills, prescribing remedies, always with the patient's well-being as the ultimate goal. This required clear sight, unwavering resolve, and a profound sense of compassion, all cultivated in these quiet moments of mental preparation. The soft, low murmurs of voices would now be more frequent, though still respectful of the quietude. He might hear the distant sounds of attendants preparing outer chambers for official audiences, the methodical movement of cleaning crews, the faint clinking of writing instruments in a nearby administrative office. These were the working sounds of empire, gradually coming to life. His mind would be fully engaged now, but calmly so. The initial deep introspection had given way to a focused anticipation, a readiness to engage with the world on its own terms, but always from a position of stoic strength. He was a rock against which the waves of circumstance might break, yet he remained firm and unyielding. This deliberate act of preparing for his public role was a daily affirmation of his chosen path. He was not merely performing a job, he was fulfilling his destiny with conscious intent. The mantle was not forced upon him, he chose to wear it, every single day, with the full weight of his philosophical conviction. He would remind himself that true freedom lay in mastering his own internal world, regardless of the external pressures. The vast responsibilities of the empire were immense, but they could not touch his inner citadel of peace, unless he allowed them to. And he would not. The subtle feeling of expectation, emanating from the palace staff and the city beyond, might now be almost palpable. They awaited their emperor. But Marcus Aurelius would meet this expectation not with a forced demeanor, but with the genuine composure born of deep personal conviction. He was not acting a part, he was living his truth, even in the most public of roles. He would take a final, deep breath, a final internal check. His mind was clear, his resolve unwavering, his purpose defined. The last vestiges of private contemplation would now merge seamlessly into the focused attention required by his imperial duties. The man who had awoken in humble solitude, washed with simple water, and read from ancient scrolls, was now fully ready to embody the majesty and the burden of the emperor. The transition was complete, not with a flourish of trumpets, but with the quiet dignity of a Stoic choosing his path. He was ready to step forward, to meet the day's challenges, to lead the vast Roman Empire with wisdom, justice, and the profound calm cultivated in the serene hours of dawn. The mantle had been donned, not for show, but for service. The very air in the main palace hall seemed to hum with a subtle anticipation. Marcus Aurelius, having meticulously prepared his mind for the weighty responsibilities ahead, was ready to step fully into his imperial identity. He had accepted the burden of his office not with resignation, but with a profound sense of duty and the serene composure of a true Stoic. His presence would soon fill these grand spaces, but it would be a presence of quiet authority, born of internal discipline rather than outward display. The mantle was now firmly in place, not as a decorative adornment, but as the philosophical armor of a man dedicated to living virtuously in the highest office. The quiet anticipation of the palace would now begin its transformation into the active, albeit ordered, functions of the Roman court. Marcus Aurelius, having fully prepared himself with unwavering Stoic resolve, was now fully poised to step forth, embodying the wisdom and tranquility forged in the profound stillness of his morning. The emperor, in full command of himself, was ready to meet his world. Chapter 8: Stepping into the Day, the Stoics' Measured Pace. With his mind fortified by philosophy, his body refreshed by simple routine, and his soul resolved to its imperial duty, Marcus Aurelius now took the final, deliberate step into the burgeoning day. This was the true crossing of the threshold, from the quiet, internal world of preparation to the expansive, public realm of the Roman Empire. Yet, he carried his inner peace with him, a tranquil core amidst the world's increasing stir. He moved from the more secluded corridors, where silence still lingered, into the grander, more open spaces of the imperial palace. Here, the morning light streamed in more freely, illuminating vast marble halls, towering columns, and sweeping mosaics. The air felt lighter, carrying the scent of morning freshness, mingling subtly with the ancient scent of stone and the faintest hint of human activity. The sounds, too, were now more present, yet still far from overwhelming. The distinct murmur of numerous voices, though still hushed, carried through the expansive halls. The soft clatter of distant doors, the quiet rustle of official scrolls being unrolled in administrative offices, the faint, rhythmic sweep of brooms in faraway courtyards, these were the working sounds of a vast empire, meticulously set in motion. His pace remained unchanged, measured, unhurried, perfectly composed. Each step on the polished marble floors echoed softly, a rhythmic cadence that mirrored the steady beat of his philosophical heart. He was not hurrying to meet the day's demands, but calmly walking into them, fully present in each moment, observing the unfolding world around him without judgment or haste. He might pass groups of palace officials, senators, or military commanders, already gathered, perhaps engaged in quiet, preliminary discussions. Their conversations would instantly cease, their gazes would respectfully lower, and their bodies would assume deferential postures. Their greetings would be soft, respectful, a quiet acknowledgement of his presence. Marcus Aurelius would respond with a composed nod, a brief, steady glance that conveyed his awareness and his unshakable calm. There was no need for extensive dialogue, no hurried questions or sudden commands. His very presence, imbued with the tranquility he had cultivated, he noticed the subtle shifts in the palace's energy, the gradual increase in light, the growing hum of activity, the faint, tantalizing aroma of distant kitchens preparing the day's main meal. These were not distractions, but simply elements of the larger world, observed without judgment or attachment. He was a keen observer, taking in the details of his surroundings, yet remaining rooted in his inner peace. His mind, sharpened by morning reading and meditation, would already be processing initial observations. He might note a particular expression on a courtier's face, a subtle nuance in a guard's posture, a quiet efficiency in a servant's movement. These were small pieces of information, gathered without overt effort, merely as part of his watchful engagement with the world. He carried with him the Stoic understanding that external events, whether grand or mundane, were fundamentally neutral. It was his perception, his judgment, that gave them meaning. And he chose, in every moment, to perceive them with reason and equanimity, refusing to allow any external circumstance to disturb his inner citadel. As he moved deeper into the public areas, the palace truly began to hum with life. The sounds of sandaled feet became more frequent, the murmur of voices more constant. But even here, within the heart of the Roman government, there was a pervading sense of order, a quiet efficiency that often surprised those unaccustomed to imperial precision. The emperor's calm was infectious, setting the tone for the entire household. He might briefly pass an open doorway, catching a glimpse of scribes already at work in a scriptorium, their quills scratching softly against papyrus. Or perhaps a gardener tending to a potted plant in a sunlit atrium, engaged in quiet, meticulous labor. These glimpses of ordinary, purposeful activity were woven into the grand tapestry of the imperial day, each a small reflection of life's continuing flow. His gaze would be steady, his expression composed. He offered no sudden smiles, no bursts of emotion. His presence was one of quiet authority, a deep well of calm that others could draw upon, consciously or unconsciously. He was the anchor of the Roman ship, steering it with a steady, unhurried hand through the currents of the day. The knowledge that he was about to face countless petitions, difficult decisions, and complex political maneuvers did not hasten his step or disturb his inner tranquility. He had prepared for them, not by seeking to avoid them, but by embracing them as opportunities to practice his virtues. Every challenge was a chance to embody justice, courage, and wisdom. He understood that true power lay not in external might, but in internal self-mastery. The ability to remain unperturbed amidst the clamor, to think clearly under pressure, to act virtuously in the face of temptation, these were the marks of a true ruler, forged in the quiet hours of his morning. The vastness of the palace, now fully lit by the morning sun, extended in every direction, a testament to the immense power concentrated within these walls. Yet, Marcus Aurelius remained centered, his individual human presence a still point in the grand architectural expanse. His path might lead him past a statue of an ancestor, or a bust of a revered philosopher. He would pass them without stopping, but perhaps with a fleeting, internal acknowledgement of their enduring presence, and the continuity of the Roman spirit and the philosophical tradition. These were silent reminders of the long line of those who had come before him, and those who would follow. The sounds of the city beyond the palace walls would now begin to assert themselves more clearly, the distant rumble of carts on the Via Sacra, the faint, high-pitched cries of street vendors, the lowing of cattle being driven to market, the laughter of children playing in a nearby insula. These were the sounds of Rome, waking to life, a testament to the thriving, complex world he was bound to serve. He carried these sounds not as a burden, but as a symphony of life, a reminder of the millions of individual lives he was committed to protecting and guiding. His Stoic principles extended beyond the palace walls, encompassing the entire human community. The physical warmth of the rising sun would now be felt, permeating the great halls. The cool air of dawn had fully given way to the gentle warmth of mid-morning. It was a comforting sensation, a natural transition, mirroring his own steady progression into the duties of the day. He was ready to listen, to weigh arguments, to make difficult choices. But he would do so with a mind unclouded by personal prejudice or hurried judgment. The clarity and composure forged in his private moments would now serve as the bedrock for all his public actions. His measured pace was not just physical, it was a reflection of his measured thought. He would not seek confrontation, nor would he avoid it if duty called. He would approach each interaction, each decision, with the same calm resolve that had defined his awakening. His principles were his unwavering guides, his inner peace his constant companion. The subtle movements of attendants preparing outer chambers for official audiences would be more evident now, the arranging of seating, the careful placement of writing implements, the soft rustle of new papyrus scrolls. These were the final preparations for the formal engagements that marked the emperor's public day. As he reached the entrance to the first public meeting space, or perhaps a formal receiving hall, there might be a final, almost imperceptible pause. Not a moment of hesitation, but a final, deep breath, a last internal check. He was fully present, fully prepared, a living embodiment of the Stoic ideal. The philosophical reflections of his dawn, the quiet strength of his simple routine, the profound wisdom absorbed from ancient texts, all these coalesced within him. He was not merely stepping into a room, he was bringing the accumulated wisdom and tranquility of his morning into the heart of the Roman Empire. He understood that his role was not about control over others, but control over himself. His equanimity was his greatest tool, his unwavering reason his most potent weapon. He would face the day's complexities with a quiet dignity that transcended the fleeting currents of power and politics. The vastness of Rome, the intricate web of its governance, the hopes and struggles of its people, all these weighed upon him. Yet, he met them with the profound calmness of one who understood his place in the cosmic order, and his duty to live virtuously within it. And so, with a steady gaze and a measured pace, Marcus Aurelius would step into the fuller light of the Roman day. Not with a sudden burst of energy, but with the quiet, sustained power of a deep and unshakable inner calm. He was the philosopher king, leading by example, embodying the tranquil strength of a Stoic heart. His morning rituals had ensured that he brought not only his intellect and authority to his role, but also a profound, enduring peace. He was ready to govern, to judge, to lead, always with reason as his guide and virtue as his ultimate aim. The great halls of the palace would now begin to truly fill, the sounds of activity swelling, yet somehow, around Marcus Aurelius, a pocket of tranquility would always remain. His presence would be a steady anchor, a testament to the power of inner discipline. He carried the quiet of his dawn within him, a silent wellspring of wisdom and peace, available to him through every moment of the demanding imperial day. The sun would continue its ascent, traversing the vast Roman sky, bringing its warmth and light to every corner of the empire. And Marcus Aurelius, having meticulously prepared himself, would move through his day with the same steady, unhurried pace, meeting each challenge, each interaction, with the profound serenity of a life lived in harmony with reason. His was a quiet strength, a lasting legacy, echoing through the ages. And as the day progressed, and the shadows lengthened towards evening, the deep calm cultivated in Marcus Aurelius's morning would remain. It was the enduring legacy of his Stoic commitment, a quiet testament to the profound power of self-mastery, a peaceful and enduring presence that would guide him until the quiet return of night, and the promise of another tranquil dawn. His wisdom, like the gentle flow of the Tiber, would continue to shape the course of his empire, a quiet force of reason and enduring peace. And now we are about to end this story. But before it ends there, here is the summary of how a great man had his simple ways of facing the new day. With the first light of dawn, Marcus Aurelius would rise, not to the clamor of an empire, but to the quiet stirrings within himself. His morning was a deliberate act of preparation, a mental forging against the day's inevitable trials. He didn't rush to his duties or immediately immerse himself in the weighty decisions of state. Instead, he sought a different kind of strength, one drawn from contemplation and the ancient wisdom he so deeply revered. He would begin not with grand pronouncements, but with a humble recognition of his own humanity. Perhaps he'd recall Epictetus's teachings, reminding himself that some things were within his control, and many were not. He would reflect on the transient nature of life, a Stoic acceptance that freed him from the grip of trivial worries. This wasn't a morbid dwelling on mortality, but a potent reminder to live with purpose and virtue in every waking moment. A simple meal, perhaps a bit of bread and fruit would sustain his body as his mind savored deeper nourishment. He might then turn to his personal journal, the Meditations as we now know it. Here, in the quiet solitude, he wrestled with his doubts, reinforced his principles, and sought clarity. Each entry was a conversation with himself, a rigorous exercise in self-examination, ensuring his actions aligned with his profound philosophical beliefs. This wasn't a rigid ritual, but a flexible discipline, adapting to the needs of the day yet never sacrificing its core intent. The rustle of his toga, the soft scratching of his stylus, the measured breaths, each sound was a testament to a man building his inner fortress, brick by Stoic brick. He wasn't merely preparing for a day of governance. He was preparing his soul for a day of living, facing its challenges with a composed spirit. As the sun climbed higher, casting longer shadows across the imperial chambers, Marcus Aurelius would finally turn to the demands of his office. But he would do so not as a man burdened by the world, but as one fortified by his morning's devotion. The emperor, who would soon guide an empire, had first guided himself, ensuring that even amidst the chaos of the Roman world, his own inner realm remained a bastion of peace and reason. And that's all. Thank you for your time.